Hello and welcome to another video. Today we are kind of back to our usual business of making educational content, and of course, more specifically, this will be the big Stelle overview. The purpose of this video isn't necessarily to tell you specifically how to play Stelle, but more to give you a very clear idea of which concepts go into this character, how they all connect, and give you a solid baseline understanding that you can continue to build on as you play and work things out for yourself. We'll probably make some more specific guides as well in the future that tell you kind of on a step-by-step basis what you should do in any given run. But this feels like the perfect starting point. The hero is brand new. Most people won't necessarily know exactly what she does. And if you've done a few runs and you want to get a better understanding, or if you want to have an okay understanding before jumping into your first run, this is the video for you. But before we get into it, I just want to announce that we have hit our 1,000 subscriber milestone, which feels absolutely mind-blowing to me. So I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who's been supporting the channel, and I really hope that you guys stick around. With all that said though, I will first briefly talk about who is Stelle. And this is just going to be kind of the overarching concepts to make the following page of the actual overview easier to follow along with and understand. But for starters, Stelle is of course our newest hero added to the Bazaar. She is a mechanic, and this means that she has a lot of items that are either tools or vehicles, and this will be a very overarching theme that permeates her entire concept. This also means that she has sort of this flying grounded dichotomy where a lot of her vehicles and things related to them are things that can fly or make other things fly or make things stop flying. But she does have some things in her kit which don't really care about that and instead rather just remain on the ground and function almost like the regular items on any other hero. So keep this in mind, and we will look at the overview. As always, I want to put in a caveat that the items shown on the screen are not absolute representations of each category. They are just meant to be some examples. For example, this is meant to represent tools, and I've chosen box cutter and wrench because of course they're very iconic, they look very tool-like. But if there's a tool that isn't there, like hammer, it's still the category it belongs in. I just can't put every single item on the screen or it would be completely out of control. We also, as per usual, have this segment down here, which are things that I classify as modifiers, where they don't necessarily directly connect to a specific other thing in her kit, and it's more like they can connect to almost anything. The radar dome is maybe even the most broad one, since it can give multicast to any flying item that's either a weapon, a shield item, or a burn item, or multiple instances of multicast for items that have multiple triggers. And as, you know, usually almost any build will have at least one item that's a weapon or shielded or burn. If you manage to win with none of that and you want to send me a screenshot, then massive props, to be honest. But it means that this will usually go with most of her builds when you happen to find a good spot for Radar Dome. And it's similar with the other two categories, which represent more generally vehicles. We have stuff like Launchpad, we have stuff like Propane Tank. So many of Stell's items are vehicles that I couldn't really put these in any specific spot on the board. They are things you just add in when you have a vehicle and they are good with the vehicle you have, chuck it on there. We also have hanger and flare gun, which are items that specifically either are tools and have vehicle synergy in the case of flare, or have both tool and vehicle synergy in the case of hanger, which is also why it sort of connects to this broader tool category as a whole. But the idea is, again, so many of our things are either vehicles or tools that it's impossible to put that in a specific spot on the map. You can run it anywhere where it's relevant. I'll also mention that she has this kind of lava roller self-destroy archetype, with some items that care about themselves getting destroyed. This goes for propane tank as well, and some items that both want to be destroyed and can destroy themselves. But right now, they don't hugely connect to any of her other archetypes. So they're mostly there because I still want to highlight them in case they become relevant in the future through something like an expansion. It's good to know that they exist, but they won't necessarily be at the forefront of your mind for the rest of this overview. But that brings us back to kind of the starting point. We have tools. Tools connect into a lot of different things, but one of the most obvious ones is this Molten Ball Blaster down here, which simply charges when you use tools, it deals damage, it burns. If you're playing tools on the board in the early game, this is your bread and butter payoff. It's simple, it converts tool use into damage. Damage kills the opponent. We also do have this kind of other sub-theme of burn tools with the thingamajiggy or the pressure boiler, which lets you charge it with tool use, and then it gives adjacent burn items more burn. So there is some overlap there, but as of right now, they don't hugely connect into any other part of Stell's kit. There is some overlap with the balloon engine here, but we'll get to that later. The other thing that doesn't necessarily hugely connect to other stuff in Stell's kit is we do have these, well, these do, we're just getting to the thing that doesn't really. These are tools that slow and haste, and they are very interconnected just on account of they slow, they haste, they are tools. A lot of things care about that, but it ties into more specifically Stell's kind of slow archetype, which typically runs stuff like Weather Machine or Nicola or Fire Hose, things that give a lot of slow triggers that you can then convert into something like burn or damage by using either this Steam Hose or this Lightning Rod. Lightning Rod is almost just like a bigger proboscis with some extra upside. So if you've ever seen shot glass proboscis comps on Vanessa, you know what you're in for. This is just kind of the souped up version of that. They also do connect more broadly into stuff up here, but again, that is something we will get to a little bit later. Same goes with these things, which are just tools that generate haste, which means that they have both tool synergy and haste synergy. But before we get to there, I'll talk about the last thing that has very specific tool synergy, namely Stell's Workshop. This one is probably the most unique item on the entire list in terms of what it does. It makes it so that whenever you use a tool, you charge a drone or vehicle. And there's definitely a possibility that there's even more unutilized potential here with combos that we haven't figured out yet. But the thing that people already definitely do with this is that you can combine it with the items that are both tools and drones, or drone synergy, like joystick and angle grinder, to create kind of charge loops where you funnel all of the procs into the angle grinder, which can in turn fuel something like a rivet gun and then just generate a lot of procs. And this is something that you can combine very broadly with stuff in Stell's kit. One of the coolest combinations is with the space laser, which we get to this category later on, but it just relies on items that are flying triggering in order to charge itself to deal 9,999 damage to the opposing player. And of course, if you have the angle grinder drone making a bunch of things flying, and then through the use of Stell's Workshop, joystick, rivet gun, you're charging that flying item a whole bunch, then you can activate this item very quickly. But this is a very broad synergy. It's almost best to think of it as something like Speedrunner on Pygmalion, where you can use it to charge a wide variety of things. We also do have some more specific drone synergy, which is primarily when it comes to these drone weapons that also care about being flying, such as aerial turret or rocket drone. And specifically, because they care about being flying, it's useful to have the grinder drone to make them flying, and because they're drones, they can be charged with the joystick, and this kind of ties into her core aggro archetype, which is red flying weapon stuff. You can use hang glider to make all of your stuff start flying, and then it'll scale your flying weapons. Lightning butterfly works similarly. It starts flying and scales your flying weapons, and then of course Karakara just gives a board-wide damage buff to weapons that are flying, but also functions to make things start flying. And as you can see, this has all been kind of centered around things starting to fly. And that's exactly what funnels into this first broader category of flying payoffs. These are what I would call the airborne compositions. They are compositions that care about things starting to fly, ideally as fast as possible and as many items as possible, but they do not care about things repeatedly starting or stopping flying, or outright, they don't care about things stopping flying at all. They just want you to get up in there and stay up in there. And this third category over here is exactly those items, the items that make things start flying. Balloon engine is a little bit of an outlier. Other stuff that belongs in this category would be, for example, we have arc cannon, which is also a bit of an outlier on account of being a little bit of a win condition in and of itself, or propeller. There are a lot of items and support items, and with Balloon Engine it is noteworthy that on account of being one of the only rapid fire burn triggers in Stelle's kit, it has unique interactions with stuff such as smoke detector, but for the purpose of simplicity I placed it for now in this start flying category. It is also something that you oftentimes in practice play with cycling or stopping stuff, but you'll kind of understand that as we get into them. The cycling stuff specifically is the stuff that both starts and stops things flying, and then you have the raw stoppers, which just stop things flying. And this is the trifecta of how you interact with flying as an output. You have things that either make things start flying, make things stop flying, or do both. And I categorize these as starters, stoppers, and cyclers. When it comes to playing cyclers, the most straightforward thing of doing with them, and again, you have to remember that if you have a starter and a stopper and you line them up properly, you've effectively made a cycler. So Ornithopter and a marshalling lights can fill the same function as a freefall simulator, but not necessarily vice versa. It depends a little bit, as the cyclers can be bad at comps that want to remain airborne. However, there are some just raw payoffs that interact really favorably with cycling. Daggerwing gains damage both when things start flying and when things stop flying, and doesn't have any particular obligation to remain flying itself, so you can very freely just make things start flying, stop flying, start flying, stop flying, and then just hit people hard. Wrecking Ball works similarly, as it charges whenever it gains flying, which doesn't inherently make it care about cycling, but in practice it makes it an item that then wants to stop so that it can start again. And that's why a lot of the things, even if they only say one half of the thing, in practice care about both starting and stopping. You can also tie that into this haste flight category, which finally brings us back into the haste corner. There are things like headset, which gives things haste when they start flying, or the anemometer, which gives things haste both when they start or stop flying, which gives Stelle access to some of the best targeted haste procs in the entire game, which in turn lets you fuel a few different win conditions. And this does bring us back to tying in these other items that we talked about previously, the tool haste stuff, the slow haste stuff, and the generic haste stuff itself all funnels up here to create the broader Haste payoff archetype as a whole, currently mostly consisting of Stellar Swallowtail stealth ship, which charges whenever anything gains haste, so it's excellent with these like rapidly proccing stuff like an anemometer or even a smoke detector. And then the pill buggy, which scales its own numbers whenever it gains haste, and then shields and deals damage equal to its shielding. So it's a very powerful payoff, but that requires you to specifically get the triggers onto it. And these comps can definitely tend to utilize the start and stop stuff as well, or just the cycling stuff, or just the starting stuff. Depends a little bit on what triggers you have in what configuration, which is where a lot of stealth complexity comes from. It's just maximizing your triggers. Sometimes you want to maximize flight triggers, sometimes haste triggers, sometimes slow triggers, but that's an overarching theme. You do also have those tie into this ramming balloon, which is both the equivalent of Karakara in terms of boosting flying shield items, but more specifically, it's also just a generic shield payoff that only cares about you having shield. And you do have this defensive trifecta kind of over here, with these are items that shield you when you stop. This is an item, Oxygen Mask, which gives you regen when you shield. And then we have these two, which are kind of the regen main regen providers in the parachute that scales its own regen both when you start or stop flying, and the kite that gives you regen when things start flying. The reason I've kind of cordoned them off specifically isn't because right now they have some clear-cut synergy. In fact, it's almost like there's a square here that is clearly missing, which is the haste, or the regen rather, payoff that would tie this stuff in. Imagine something like Moose Staff or the ring that turns your regen into poison. Just anything like that would immediately catapult this into a very distinct archetype. As of launch, Stelle doesn't have that, which means that they could just as well, this could be treated as a cycle payoff and go up here with stuff like Wrecking Ball and Air Pressure Rifle. But I wanted to give them their own special section just in case this question mark box gets filled in the future. I just realized I drew the question mark behind me. Ignore that. It's right behind my face is where I would have put a regen payoff item if I had one. But right now, you just play them more as like generic defense options, especially in the early mid game, and you just put them with whatever else they synergize with. But they felt worth pointing out because it is something that has the potential to turn into a complete archetype with just a distinct regen payoff. And it's also worth pointing out that the parachute can get to a pretty ridiculous number, so if you do happen to find a damage enchant of some sort on that, then you do have a comp. Finally, I did mention we have the stoppers. We have stuff like marshalling lights and glue. They do loosely tie into tool stuff because a lot of them are tools as well, like the marshalling lights. But they are sort of distinct because on account of the tool stuff oftentimes not caring about flight, it doesn't care about stopping flying if it doesn't care about flying in the first place, but treat it a little bit loosely. There are exceptions on pretty much every form of board. These do also synergize with the hang glider, which has the effect to deal damage when things stop flying as well. So there is that angle to consider. But we even have some stuff that specifically only really care about stopping, like Bomb Voyage or Buster, where you do need to connect them to the stuff that starts flying because you can't stop flying if you haven't started flying. And they do connect to the cycling stuff because something like a freefall simulator can both be the starter and the stopper. But thematically, they are the most adjacent to these stop flying items because they are the only things in the game that explicitly care about I just want to stop. And this is also true currently for these ones. They only care about stopping stuff, but they were closer to the shield synergy than to this specific. And I think that about covers us. So this was again a very broad overview on how Stelle works thematically, and more importantly, how all of her stuff connects to each other. I think it is simple in many ways. It is intuitive. You will probably get it when you're playing it, but the depth and complexity comes from figuring out the optimal positionings in order to maximize the effect of whatever trigger you're pursuing or otherwise. So for me personally, Stelle has been some of the most fun I've had playing the game in a long time. If you like these kinds of optimization puzzles, if you miss stuff like the old days of kind of aquatic Vanessa being a very prominent archetype, I think you can really enjoy this character. With all that said though, I thank you all for watching. I hope that you found this useful in some way, and if you want to see more content like this, then do subscribe to the channel. I'm really grateful if you want to like the video or share it with some friends. But regardless, I hope that wherever you are, you have a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night, and that hopefully I'll see you in the next one.